Well, this is different. I'm holding a microphone. On this video, I'm joined by YouTube star, blogger, writer, autistic advocate, and all-round good guy, Hunter Hansen from the Life Autistic. So whatever you do, don't go anywhere, because Hunter and I are going to explore the now famously controversial research study into autism called Spectrum 10K. Gonna get something. Hey, I'm orionkelly, that autistic guy, and since my diagnosis later in life, I've devoted my time to advocating for the autistic community. And I do that through my podcasts, my blogs, and these YouTube videos. And I do that with a view of raising a level of understanding and acceptance of autistic people. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in learning more of and joining our community, well, I'd love it if you would do that. By the way, a special thank you to you if you've taken the time to already subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out my content. And if you haven't, I would be absolutely delighted if you consider subscribing to my YouTube channel by clicking that subscribe button and ringing the notifications bell so you never miss another episode. That way you'll help me reach more people across the planet. And you can check me out on my socials. So if you want to connect with our beautiful community we have, then find me on Facebook. Follow the Orion Kelly page on Facebook. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. So whatever your social communication preferences are, find me Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you want to see all my content in the one place, you'll find my podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, info on me. You can even reach out and send me a message. Just go to my website, orionkelly.com.au. Check out the website and say hey. All right, let's do this. Hunter joined me for a very special international hookup from different sides of the planet. Oh, and by the way, I live in the middle of nowhere, aka Australia. So there may be some internet glitches from time to time, but nothing you need to worry about. Just wanted to put it out there. All right, here's my chat with Hunter Hansen from the Life Autistic. Hunter, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It is like legitimately great to finally chat to you because you and I, we've kind of been on similar paths. We kind of started around the same time, and I found your videos, and I'm a big fan. I'm an actual fan, and I love your stuff, and it's definitely motivational for me. So I look forward to copying more of your videos, the ones that get the most views, as soon as possible.
Happy to dish, man. It's been a weird. There's been some learnings in that, and just it's almost like the self-discovery of one's own autism, and then discovery about creation. And I think, as ultimately, as you make people feel less alone in this, like there's some things that make them feel less alone than others. Yeah. But yeah, that's another topic entirely, but I'm happy.
No, I agree. Because from my point of view, it's like meeting someone I've known all my life. It's really, and that's really helpful. So he's fantastic. And obviously you're watching on my channel. Clearly you would know Hunter. But if you do not know Hunter, the Life Autistic, you want to find him and subscribe and check him out because he has some amazing content. So please, although I'm sure you already know about him, if you don't, go and find him. He's amazing. Now, let's talk about, and I'm really happy to talk about Spectrum 10K with you, because in your videos, a lot of times you'll say, instead of naming organizations that are touchy, you won't say them. You'll say, look, there is an organization, but I'll leave that up to you to look into. And I respect that, because in the end, we all have our own way of communicating and interacting with people. You will know that I'm more of the hothead. That's why this conversation is good. But from that point of view, I'm really happy to talk about Spectrum 10K with you, because this is one of those topics where I feel like you'd say, you know what, I'm not really going to go into this, do your research and look into it. So thank you for talking about it. And that's good, because I dig that. I dig that about you. So, okay, for the benefit of not us, but everyone, I'll just quickly go through this, guys. So I've got from their official website, Spectrum 10K aims to investigate the genetic and environmental factors that contribute to autism and related physical and mental health conditions to better understand well-being in autistic people and their families. The families part is a bit strange. It's hoped 10,000 autistic people, and where possible, their families will take part. So the study, this is the thing, Hunter, it's in bold. This study will not look for a cure for autism and does not aim to eradicate autism. I'm not doing any opinions here. Every member of the Spectrum 10K team and values and respects the differences, blah, 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 whatever. Participants will complete an online questionnaire and provide a DNA saliva sample. And it says Spectrum 10K researchers will study the information collected from the questionnaire and DNA saliva sample alongside their electronic health records. This is clearly for UK residents based in the UK only. Okay. So the first thing that pops up to me, Hunter, is there seems a contradiction. So they're looking at genetic and environmental factors contributing to autism, but they're not looking for like cure, prevention, or eradication. The intention of the study to me seems conflicted. What's your initial thoughts on just purely the intention of the study? Because it talks about well-being, and we can dig deeper soon, but just what's the intention to you?
Yeah, you know me, and I'm, as much as I want to say, you should look this up and do your research. I'm gonna pivot and just say the reason I say that, there are always going to be looming specters of things that just don't sit well with autistic people in the neurodivergent populace. I can say, hey, watch out for groups that aim to, do some things that may seem questionable. I can say that in 2021. That will apply to some new thing in 2023. I like to leave it blank. And personally, buddy, I got like 3 children. They have sapped out all my energy. So I have so little left for, even my most passionate invective, which I have to purpose differently. However, my knee-jerk thought was like, if I'm not being given 10 grand to participate, like that disappoints me, Spectrum 10K here. I thought it was
amazing.
Like, shoot, I would have been okay, not really, but semi-okay with like a 10 gram payday for my prime autistic DNA. Like,
you put a price on your DNA and it's
exactly. It's like, hey, you know what? I've got, great memory skills, superior masking, white, male. Like, I mean, and for this audience, I'm joking. I'm just dripping with sarcasm. I'm always, it just, when they mention, hey, we're going to study your DNA, but use that to extrapolate it into like environmental factors and the well-being of you and your family. By trade, I'm more in the data business. I don't talk in specifics about that, but I do find that it is a rather specific biometric data collection aim for something that I don't really see a clear link to how. This might just be my lack of understanding, but I don't see a link to how it's going to inform other elements of my holistic well-being. Like, cool, my DNA, but why can't I just sample my environmental DNA to give you a perspective of, hey, here's my composition as a person. What you're aiming to answer requires a much more comprehensive sample of things that you can't test. So it's almost like we're trying to solve for more things. For reasons I can't go into, I do have some professional and specific insight into, the use of biometric data. And I'm going to dance around that. I wish I could say more, but you can infer from details about me and about just how one's data is used. It's not the immediate purpose. It's what it can be used for. And I think that's enough to give me pause personally. Like, when somebody says we only promise to use it for X, Y, and Z, there's a lot of compromise that could potentially happen. I'm not confident in the technology of many companies to, protect something like that. And I can get into like the data biases and stuff, but as far as the aim, it's just, it seems very laser focused. And I think with some of the points that you'd mentioned that we'll probably cover, while it's not necessarily a slippery slope to infer that there's more nefarious aims, the fact that you can see the landscape pitching downward to that gives me pause, and that's, again, I'm pretty slow to wrath, man. I'm just old, but to project into the future, like, what are the best and worst possible outcomes? I feel like the best outcomes of this are potentially incomplete. The worst, I don't think, are apocalyptic, but I do think would be very unnerving and damaging to, like, what I think are greater aims in the autistic community, which is we need better support environments and structures. That's cool that you've mapped out my genes. Tell me, like, how I can switch off my migraines, but I don't know if my neurotype is so simple as to be just a DNA mapping exercise. And then there's a lot of and then what's that follow. So a bit of a rant, but yeah.
No, that's good. And you can only look at history to see what could happen on the slippery slope, and history isn't good. So, but I think before we move on to DNA and the data, the other thing I just wanted to quickly touch on and ask you about with the kind of intention is, okay, so they're basically saying, okay, so some autistic people have what they would class as bad comorbidities and some don't. And they're trying to say, we're going to help you, autistic people, have better lives by working out why some autistic people have comorbidities of, say, epilepsy or anxiety or whatever that may be, and why some of you don't. But then the question is, okay, ... But then what are you going to do to help that? So there seems like there's a focus on comorbidities and I don't know, is it a tenuous link to autism? But what are your thoughts on the idea that that's kind of, they're focusing on other things that affect your life and how that will impact your well-being, but how?
It's one of those, because that's a little new to me in terms of where the comorbidities come into play. But I know people and children who are epileptic. They're not autistic, So if you're so interested in addressing those elements, like my little glib joke about migraines, like why is there no like migraine cure? You know what I mean? Like there is no serviceable purpose to those, and I think you'd be hard pressed to say like, hey, this is not a variation, this is a debilitation. I would argue that autism is a it's a neurotype, it's a variation. And yes, I understand it poses, challenges in my life, but that is my neurological wiring. It's not a disease for me. So I do feel like there's so many other associated elements to it that I would almost wonder why those are not their own focus points. Like why, is epilepsy still a thing, right? It's not cured, it's not treated. Like, so there's other isolated things to where I would rather advocate for understanding those in like of any neurotype, right? Just on the face of it, I feel like if I could, if I were on that study looking at comorbidities, I'd wonder like, why am I making this more difficult? And again, I'm not an expert in this stuff. I'm not an expert in autism. I just I am autistic. That's my experience. But yeah, I think, like I said, the portent is, it's just worrisome. And you even see, just based on I'll just say some of the reaction from the autistic community. It's hard to get everything 100% right 100% of the time, but I think reactions to how autism studies portrayals and the experiences handled is kind of a tell. And the fact that you've got such outsized reaction should give people pause, especially in what I think is just ridiculous in like a self-selection study, where it's people who are diagnosed and opting into it. You have two levels of bias that ignores diagnosis, and I'm pretty picky about the self-selection element. So it's like one of those intent, like, you can say that, but I realize that intents may change, but the data that you've harvested doesn't. You've already got, in other words,
they're kind of using the comorbidities as like a foil, as a veil.
It could be. It's one of those. It's hard to judge what intents are, but then like I think you're kind of hinting in a way, what's to say that the landscape changes in a few years, and obviously it's borderline unethical to say, well, you know what, we have all this, we can use this for this purpose instead, even though it skirts the bounds of how we collected it. I would hope that there's better intent. I don't really see this as like a the tip of the spear to finally like eradicate autistic people, you know, but I do feel like, again, there's just too many concerns and portents and just gaps in like really connecting with the autistic community, especially, you know, especially like more passionate advocates who are very public and prominent in their work. Like if I'm going for something, I'm going to go for the people I know who would have the most vociferous opposition, you know, just even from a PR standpoint. Like,
Yeah.
you know, this ain't going to sit well with the autistic community. How
Yeah.
do I bring some of these voices to say, what's your take? Is there a way to do it? Like, here's literally what we're trying to do. Can you help me manage an approach, or can you help inform how you would want this to be done? You know, because I think there's learning that exists on both sides, and I'm open to learn it too.
And I think the PR was pretty slick. I'm so happy to see. I'm so happy to see the kids that I see on your video in my video now. They deserve to be on my channel as well.
I know Zoe's breaking in, so this may get really interesting. What do you need, Zadie? You want to what? Why don't you go find the iPad? Okay. Yeah. Why don't you go in there, and if you could shut my door. Yeah.
I'm not editing that out, by the way. That's staying in.
Oh my goodness. No, you can watch it in the bedroom. Can you shut the door though, Zadie? She's done this for like a lot of work stuff too, so I'm used
This
to
is
it.
exactly like my family right now too. It's good.
I know.
like it.
It's all right. So it's like one of those, I need like a really long stick to close my door. Nah, man, leave it in, y'all. You know, it's funny because I usually do my videos like when they're all out of the house, just because actually, no, it's not because of the kids, it's the dogs. They don't bark when it's just me here. So I don't have to do as much sound editing. But yeah. No, all good. We'll see where this goes. Zadie may have some interesting contributions to the
I can't wait. So
10K discussion.
you already mentioned about the selective process, and we want to get to eugenics in a sec. But first, can I just get your take on just the basic idea of DNA collection, data groups, data collection with regards to an autistic study? What is your thoughts on DNA collection, you know, formulating data groups? I mean, I have no idea what's happening here, so educate me.
Yeah, I've never really contributed my DNA to a massive study, and it seems like a big enough ask. I'm going to take this from like a really broad level,
yep,
and then apply it to my specific domain, and then I might have to pass on some parts of the questions where I'm not expert. So from a broad perspective, if you look at all of the furor that is generated over our understanding of our data, like, you know, you look at Facebook, they have gotten in trouble for mismanaging data. You look at TikTok, and it's one of those that scrapes your data. You're an unwilling participant in so many data gathering objectives, to where I think we're getting to the point in society where we're finally realizing the value of who we are. We've enacted legislation, like at least in Europe with GDPR and other things, to where like this is being taken seriously. And it's kind of too little too late, I think. But I feel like the more we get into it, the more we're realizing just how data is being used in ways that most people don't understand. Just how algorithms are built, composites and profiles built to kind of frame who you are. And a lot of tech companies and other companies who harvest data, just in general, or any company really, uses it to form a certain, they'll say, well, we don't know anything about you, but we can basically infer who you are, you know. And it's just, it pervades our life for purposes that we don't always consent to. And that's really difficult. People are mostly unwitting to it. You know, some realize, like, you know, when I do this and I enable this thing, this is why I see certain ads in feeds. And that's the most innocuous use of that stuff. And that's literally just me clicking on a website and visiting something. So to take it to an almost fundamental genetic level, you know, that's quite the leap. And that's not something that you know, even for medical purposes and studies, like it's just, and this is just me speaking personally, just knowing a little bit about the nature of data collection, I don't elicit a lot of comfort. I can see where, you know, we're looking for something that is specific to me, right? Like if I will mention this because it's a very public example, but Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, I think had his DNA sequenced, his own DNA or some kind of genetic mapping for the purpose of understanding how to best treat and like basically cure his own virulent pancreatic cancer. So I can see a version of Hunter who would work personally with someone to better understand me, where I could inform all elements of that. I think that's not as considerable a leap. Like if I'm talking to my doctor and it's like, hey, I'm really challenged with this, or I have a very close challenge in a related issue, the act of volunteering more information to a more personal context and something more personalized is one thing. But to contribute to an aggregate, I feel like I have less agency in that. So there's that aspect. And then from like the data standpoint, I get that different organizations are going to be limited to different populaces, right? So confining it to one region. And I think just the self-selection bit about, hey, we are only collecting information from not just autistic individuals, but those who would have had, or at least can infer some kind of diagnosis, which can mean different levels of quote unquote function, more appropriately support needs, access to diagnosis. So you have somebody who may have been diagnosed, as a child, others who don't have access to it. So I then start to get concerns about like, the data collection pool and how much bias they are getting into it. You know what I mean? So it's not like we have a database of known cancer patients, which is basically agnostic in a lot of ways. There's just so much more rigor to it than even I can bring to it. So, and again, anytime you're asking for volunteers, you are interjecting a little bit of bias into your methodology. That's generally how it works. That's why samples are conducted a little more randomly. Like you try to get like a certain control group, and there's just so much more layers to conducting these kinds of larger statistical tests that maybe I'm conflating the two a little bit here, but that's the first thing that gives me pause, just from like a data collection and testing enterprise as well. But I mean, as far as the ethics, the one area to where I don't have the expertise is how these studies are conducted for other things. Like what if it is pancreatic cancer? How do you map that out? What if you're really trying to determine whether there is a genetic or regional variant, and then the purpose of that is like, hey, we need to build a better treatment for it? Like that seems obvious. Cancer is a debilitating deviation from the norm. So but I don't know how those studies work. Like I don't know and it's not like they're testing a drug, or they didn't have to do this for like COVID patients. So it's more of understanding like deeper genetic makeup that, yeah, you could probably do that for some diseases, but autism's not a disease, but it does seem like they're using that same approach. And again, it's just, I don't get so heated about it in my projections, but there are things to where internally it's like, if this was a thing in America and they asked me my opinion, I have my opinions. I'd share them, and I'd be a little hesitant on the primary direction. Like I'd rather just build better support first, because that will elevate more than just autistic people. And then if we're looking at specific comorbidities, like, oh my goodness, my autistic son suffers from debilitating epilepsy or migraines that render him just non-functioning. It's like, well, cool, we need better drugs for migraines. Hey, let's find the genetic link to epilepsy, where there is just, it's not a variant neurotype. It is a harmful, debilitating condition. There's not like, lower support needs with epilepsy. So yeah, that's kind of my garbled, long atmospheric specific, and then where I just don't have enough insight to comment. So I hope there's an answer in there somewhere.
There is. Look, I mean, from a bioethics point of view too, I guess I was unlucky enough to do some bioethics units in uni. Unlucky is the operative word, but I think what I would say is, okay, so kids under 6. I mean, the kids are this is a predominantly, probably a lot of kids involved in this study. does that mean that their parents are just making the decision for them? I mean, can a kid under 6 or can a child of any age make informed consent? So what, and Steve Jobs is a grown man. You're a grown man.
Yeah.
There's a difference. So this is, again, what we say really has little relevance to the people doing it. They're going to do it. But I guess my point is, you were an autistic child once. Now, so was I. If our parents decided, okay, we're gonna be a part of this, we're gonna let him, we're gonna collect his DNA for this study, but you're a child, and down the track you're an adult, and the worst case scenario, the slippery slope, and your DNA was part of what eradicated or provided a screening, a prenatal screening or whatever. I mean, it's a tricky situation with regards to child informed consent and parents making that call.
Yeah, I think, and like, that's one to where I feel like that kind of, that pervades a lot more than just consent to testing. Like, I'm just thinking of all the stuff that I have to do on behalf of my daughters, forms that we have to fill out that, in general, and I'm actually going to tangent on something where I actually fall on an interesting side of this, and I wonder whether Hunter Hansen's going to have some reckoning for it. I feel like the pendulum is eventually going to swing to, our kids need more agency eventually, and it's like, at what point do we realize that, look, your parents are just going to have the best line of sight into that? Like, my daughter's not going to fill out immunization, vaccination forms. She's not going to contextualize and have enough intelligence and capability as 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old yet to make a call on what medicine she needs. I'm her dad. I should know best. I'm her parent. I'm her mom. Same thing. But I do think of where we look at other implicit non-consentables, and we've seen this more in social media, where I know a lot of autistic advocates, or just people in general, don't bring their kids into it. They will obfuscate their kids' faces because of their stance on, I want them to feel like they've had agency in more of their decisions. And sometimes it gives me pause too, because it's like, I'm very purposeful and limited to the intent in which I will share things, to where it's like, I may have to reckon with, Dad, even though I was happy in this, I didn't really have a choice. And it's like, no, you didn't, and I know I know your kids too. And you've brought them in and they've starred on videos. And I mean, I feel like you have the utmost respect and integrity, and you don't show them at their worst. Like, I feel like other, the parents of autistic children can do. So it's one of those to where there is a scary undercurrent in this information age. And I kind of wonder if there is going to be a seismic shift to where, like, we really need to consider, this is something that we do not want to look back and think our kids were unwittingly consented to something very serious, when this is something that's so important. Like, if you're too young to make a decision about something personal, then we need to just wait. So it's one of those, I wish I had a better answer, but I realize that there is, where we land on it 5 years from now is probably going to be radically different.
I mean, maybe in 5 years we'll go, we shouldn't let Ali G do a study. And of course it's not Ali. I know it's not Ali G.
It's funny because he was an original special interest of mine, like of the Baron Collins. I actually went on a bit of an Ali G show binge after I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch all these old episodes.
I've got all the DVDs. No, I is ready. Man, I love it. I absolutely
respect. It's just such, I don't want to mimic or imitate it, but what he does is like an art that was just, we didn't have the ability. Most people just didn't get it at the time.
I thought it was like, hilarious.
It was so well done. Anyway, that's all
right. So I want to talk. This is the last thing we're going to talk about. I guess the eugenics and the future use. These are the hot button issues, and there's been a lot of talk online. I'm not looking to delve into those types of arguments, because I think they they're cyclical. Autistic people will say it's eugenics. Non-autistic people will say, hang on, you're against, kind of the reference to Nazi Germany, and now you're saying, and all that's ridiculous. Eugenics isn't just Nazi Germany. So let's just talk about the idea that the core issue for autistic people, taking away all the silly arguments, is that DNA predominantly can be used to cure something, to prevent something, or to screen for something. So potentially there's the eugenics side of this study. And I think any autistic person would probably be pretty concerned that there would be a future where their life could have been a question mark based on a screening test or a prevention or a cure. Now, we know clearly that you can't acquire or cure autism. It's not a disease. It's a neurological developmental disability, or whatever you want to refer to it as. But I still think that at the core, putting on the argument aside, that to me that seems like a legitimate concern. Well, like, what are your thoughts on the idea of a prenatal screening test for autism? I mean, it's pretty intense a thought.
It is, and I usually don't delve into this because for me, it's one of those where I don't really jack up the emotional temperature of a room in an argument, especially online. It's just one to where I have to approach these things very carefully because it's hard to take, like, I'm not talking about toothpaste flavors. You can have a pretty neutral, subjective/objective commentary and discussion on.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean? So, and that's one to where, like, that's easy to do. But when it comes to, the potential eugenic consequences, I feel like that gets thrown out so quickly. Like, that's just one to where it's like, I'm just going to turn the dial all the way up on this. And then you bring in so many emotions that it tends to cloud a lot of the parts of the argument. Now, there's one thing to where it's like, I almost play like a mental double down, because one of the very fiercest issues in America, by either projection or politics or what have you, is that of abortion. And I stay very clear of that in, my public forums. I'm very guarded about that in private discussion, but it is where it may be more black and white in other countries. It's very much a hot button issue in America. So we think about eugenics, like, we associate that with a different kind of historical context. But if I talk about choice, pro-choice, pro-life, and where this intersects, and then we get to an argument where it's like, what would you do with your child if you knew they were going to be born with Down syndrome? I can tell you what the numbers say.
Well, there's a screening test. I mean, certainly
there's
in Australia, there's a prenatal screening test. Yeah,
exactly. And, based on, laws and what countries permit, mothers are given the right to, either continue their pregnancy or terminate it based on that information, and it's hard to, like, broach this unemotionally, but that's a fact. But then I think I still see people with Down syndrome who can advocate for their own quality of life.
Yes.
And you kind of, like, if you zoom in and zoom out, there's no easy way to reconcile that for a lot of people. You know what I mean? And then I think, what if we start substituting that for, your daughter is going to be autistic? Think about people's understanding of autism now.
This is the problem. Yeah, this is the problem.
But then it's like, how do you reconcile that with, as a mom, they talk, I'm just using the phrase, like, a mom's right to choose versus a person's right to live. And that's like, there's no way of knowing. There just isn't. Like, I don't know what my mom would have done. I mean, I can guess, but it's one of those where if you knew, hold on, your son's autistic, he's going to be autistic, but hey, let me show you what he's going to be like in 30 years. Like, oh, wait, that's autistic?
Yeah, exactly.
Or, so Orion, this is one to where I have to tread very lightly. And I think the real damage that's done is people throw out the eugenics thing and they go all the way to, like, reach into, I think, more ominous historical context without breaking it down to where if this is used as a screening test, we would have concerns that there would be fewer autistic people, that maybe I can be wrong on some of these things, but I would have to get a certain intersection of how you would balance autistic people who are advocating for just living full supported lives versus what mothers, parents choose to do with children who they know are going to be autistic. And then I think, maybe the fast forward element is, listen, autism's not a death sentence. Just because your son is going to be autistic, just because your daughter has markers of autism, this is not something that is guaranteed to debilitate, affect, and that's one to where you've got to kind of match ignorance with education.
Which won't be in the prenatal setting though, will it? We can't expect the people that are delivering the information of the tests, right, to know these types of things, nor is something, I guess it's something.
Yeah,
can't really
I'm not good at hypotheticals, but it's one of those where,
do you think that branches out though? Your point is exactly what I agree with, rather than the kind of the odd arguments. The fact is, you can forget about historical stuff. Eugenics is a normal genetic studies, modifications. That's just a normal way of life these days. So from a future use point of view, okay, so Spectrum 10K clearly aren't doing this. I'm not suggesting Spectrum 10K are looking to do this, but with regards to DNA and data being on-sold, being used for different purposes by other sources in the future, this is where it becomes a core concern. And I guess I agree with you that rather than having these weird Twitter arguments, we just have to acknowledge. I mean, there's people part of the Spectrum 10K team. There's someone from, I think it's UCLA, from the genetic kind of department. Now, I mean, it's not rocket science to look at connections here, but putting that aside, the future use, the on-selling of data and DNA for different purposes by different sources, am I drawing too long a bow, or is that a realistic possibility in the future? I mean, surely it is. Isn't that part of DNA research?
I think there's, I look at the scaffolds of possible and probable, and again, my knowledge on medical data collection is limited, but there are far fewer probabilities and likelihoods that do not preclude possibilities, and that's just, and it's one of those where, I'm going to come up with a hypothetical that for all the data that we collect, in general, we have not optimized ways to use it best. That's why things like data science and machine learning are continually evolving studies, and people who can solve that quicker can do better with it. People joke about the TikTok algorithm. It's not super rocket science. It's just that they found different data vectors to collect and put them together in a way that no one had done before, and it creates an addiction cycle which they can monetize. And it's kind of wild how they get people with it. So I think about it's not so much what the stated purpose and the ethical limitations are. Sometimes those things can change. Sometimes there's a creative way to where, we happen to have this data set that we now have new tools to use it for. And I don't know what those tools are. And then, I think about other possibilities. I don't even know who'd be in on it, but what's to say that there's, what's to speak of in terms of security of that. So there's a whole bunch of apocalyptic scenarios that I joke that I don't do so well with hypotheticals, and I can stretch to think that there are many possibilities, but as with many things, the probabilities tend to be just a lot more boring. Every, and I say this, and I feel like I'm going to be proven more right than wrong, and it's not to dismiss anybody, but for all of the autistic apocalyptic scenarios to where we feel like the cause has been set back, it really hasn't. I mean, maybe it's a couple steps back, but I think it's continuing a much more positive march toward autistic awareness, and then understanding, and then appreciation. And I feel like that's moving. It's not always a straight line. And it's not always upward. And then sometimes you get things to where it's oop, there's a stumble. And it just goes to show you, well, we've got some more stereotypes to bust, but it's an upward cycle, right?
Yeah.
Like, I would argue that 10 years ago, autism and awareness and advocacy was in a much worse place. And
Yes.
yeah, we weren't facing down the threat of, Spectrum 10K or other misguided charities or films or what have you. But despite a lot of the setbacks, I kind of take the long view and think in 10 years, there's going to be better autism diagnostics,
Yeah.
for adults, for children. There's going to be more understanding, and it's going to pervade a lot more societal areas,
Yeah.
jobs, careers, understanding, and I would hope, and this is bizarre coming from me because I'm not super optimistic about stuff, but I am optimistic that it's like, you're going to get people who are going to be connected to autism in a way to where it's going to be about building greater understanding and support. I feel like there's been enough blowback and pushback about cures to where, yeah, they can try to work it in and then mask it, but even that is getting pushed back. At what point, and I think there will be a point, a lot of companies and initiatives will realize, like, you know what, we can't even make it, we can't even shape this approach in a way to where we have to claim that it's not meant as a cure. You know what I mean? So the fact that they have to put that disclaimer, I think the
Yeah.
efforts in the future are going to be more, we're looking to make lives better for autistic people.
Yeah.
We don't want to know about your DNA. We just want to know, what do you struggle with and how can we eradicate a lot of systemic obstacles? Like, why can't they just say that? Like, how about Spectrum 100K, which talks to employers who have had pervasive challenges in supporting neurodivergent talent?
Yeah.
Like, why aren't we doing that? We don't need DNA for that. It's like, why don't we just better support these people as they are? And then, hey, if there's an autistic-led study to where we can, address the comorbidities, yeah, then maybe we'll engage. So it's just, there's so much gloss, there's so much of a PR blitz campaign, but I know there's a lot of money behind a lot of this stuff, but I think those are the last vestiges of like what autism advocacy and science is about. And I think it's going to pivot just because they can't keep marching this on in perpetuity. Even there's enough of a great autistic awakening that it's not a straight line. It's not going to be upward, but I feel like autistic advocates are doing a better job advocating for their lives. Some are strident, some are invective about it, but then I think there's a balance of people, dudes like me. It's like, I just wish my cars wouldn't break down. I just want my employers not to surprise me with meetings, and they don't, and that adds to my well-being. I just need people to, so there's a lot of components to it.
I can't beat those closing remarks, so I'm not going to. But I mean, Hunter, I really do appreciate your time, because for me, it's been great to connect with you and have a chat, and hopefully we can do it again soon. And please check out Hunter's YouTube and TikTok. And what's that new thing you write on? What's it called? Is it called?
It's Substack, so that's more like a writing platform. But
okay.
I just wanted to get back into writing just to write, and you can find me on Substack too if you like reading writing.
Cool. All right. Sounds great. Hey, Hunter, thanks for your time. Really appreciate the chat. And we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Orion. Appreciate you.
How good is Hunter? Love that guy. Thank you so much for your time once again, mate. If you'd like to check out his YouTube channel, The Life Autistic, or more of his videos, please, I recommend you do that. Plus, if you'd like, you can check out my videos. And if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you take the time to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. We'll talk soon.